Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that short montage of the build against some different bosses throughout the game. I'm going to give you a quick overview of how I'm getting damage with this character and how I'm basically how I built it, and then we're going to go into doing a quick shaper run for the first time on this character. So to start off, I'm making a Facebreaker build. Basically this means you can't use a weapon and you get about 8 times the physical damage because of it. Now, because you're not using a weapon, you have no flat physical damage. You have to get that elsewhere. There's really good items to do that, like Abyssus. Unfortunately, it makes your character really get killed by physical damage a lot, and you have no life. At the end of the day, you don't really need this to have a viable character. This is just trying to take the damage to a more absurd extent. I actually get a lot of physical damage by using these rings. Circle of Guilt. Now basically what I'm doing is I'm building around Herald of Purity to get my added physical damage, and I've got 2 rings that have basically 90% buff effect. I'd pretty much would just buy a junky one for 5, 10, 20 C or so. I bought ones with increased strength because previously I was planning around doing a strength stacking build, and then I ended up wanting to do face breakers more, but these are the buff effect ones I had. But basically, you get this buff effect, which is pretty much tripling the effect of your Herald of Purity, and then you get one of these shields. And you don't have to get a Magna Eclipsis, you can also get the 2 shields that combine into this. They're like Solaris Invictus and Vix Lunaris. I'm not sure if I'm saying those names right, but they're basically the 2 other shields that have the +2 to socket to gem levels mod, and then you get them with a corruption with duration gems. The reason for doing this is so you can get a really high level Herald Purity and then hook it up to an Empower. You see, I have a level 3 Empower. You could get a level 4 Empower, I guess, if you have a lot of money to blow, but I didn't want to put that much currency into it. And it makes Herald of Purity give 40 to 60. So basically, each of these rings, that mod alone is the same as the 40 to 60 damage I'm getting from the Abyssus. So between these 2 rings, this helmet and Herald of Purity, I'm looking at about 160 to 240 flat fizz. Multiply that by about 8, you know, and you end up pretty close to a 1200 PDPS fist attack, more or less, just from the flat fizz. I'm using the Rigwald's Curse because I wanted to go crit with it. I think you very easily could probably go Elemental Overload with this build if you wanted to, because I'm fully converting to fire because I'm using Consecrated Path and a Chieftain. You'll see right here, Ascendancy nodes I went with. Basically, these nodes are really good for defense and covering your resistances for fire. And then I just grabbed the 50 conversion, and then every 10 seconds I get 100% increased or 100% extra fizzes fire, which you'll see this goes from about 700k to 1300k, so 1.3 million. So it basically doubles my damage for around half the time. And then I have covering enemies with Ash, which makes it so enemies take 20% more damage, pretty much, and then 15 pen. So these are just all good nodes for fire damage. This build went crit, so I basically path to pretty much all the general crit nodes here. I grab these nodes just because they're really good for life and elemental damage. And then I path through these accuracy nodes, which accuracy is actually pretty important. They made these nodes somewhat relevant for builds because you can actually somewhat cap your accuracy. I have right now a 96% chance to hit on basically boss characters, 3k accuracy. You need to get to 4k to get 100% accuracy, but that's just what I ended up with, how I pathed everything. With the Rigwald's Curse, you basically have claw nodes that affect your unarmed attacks. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually work for multi, so originally I was going to path this way through here, but the multiplier on all these nodes unfortunately don't actually help me, so they aren't as useful as the attack speed damage nodes. But these nodes are still really strong, and then I grab general crit multi, life, crit, fizz. So that's basically how I pad the character out. So now let's get straight into this run. First time I'm doing Shaper with this guy. So he tends to have a pretty slow hit, but even though his hit is pretty slow, he hits quite hard, and I pretty much one-shot most mobs. Not all mobs though. When you start getting to bosses in the tier 16 range, it takes a couple hits, but I'd say up till about tier 10-ish, you can pretty consistently just one-hit the map bosses, especially if they take the time to hit you and my Wave of Conviction goes off, which it really wasn't going off there, and it missed when it did, when I almost died, because I was trying to basically have a cast when damage taken set up for Wave of Conviction and Flammability, which reduce people's resistances a lot and make my hits really come through and do a lot of damage. But I'm not going to mess around with trying to do those anymore, because I almost just died right there. And that would have been a little bit awkward. I probably will die to Shaper, maybe, I'm not 100% sure. I usually can do his mechanics pretty well, but having an Abyssus on makes him hit really hard. And you can see a lot of times I'm even stunning bosses just because the hits are just really thick and juicy. I also have my War Chief socketed in there. For the longest time when I was making this character, I was thinking Ancestral War Chief has to be a duration gem, right? Because it's got duration and everything, but it actually is not. So it doesn't get the extra 2 gem levels from the shield corruption. So that was a bit of a sad moment, but still it's a pretty chunky damage boost when I get both my Val War Chiefs down for attacking enemies. I'm gonna try not to embarrass myself fighting Shaper.
Embraced by misery.
Probably didn't time that too well with popping my War Chief for he just went straight into the ad phase, but he's almost tipped over for next phase. Yeah. This build feels really nice when you're just one tapping everything. But the slow attack speed can feel kind of awkward. I definitely sometimes get caught where I'm like winding up in that slow attack speed and then I get comboed by a bunch of enemies that were kind of pre-firing where I was. But it is pretty nice just to teleport around and just slam everything into oblivion, so to speak. This is kind of what it feels like when you're clearing maps. It's not great, I'd say, but it's not horrible at the same time. I'd say for any player that's not trying to speed clear meta, it feels pretty good just to slam an entire pack and have them all explode.
Let me help you.
Pop all my flasks, see what kind of juicy hits I can get in. I did not queue at all. I got stuck in another animation. That's where the slow attack speed can really kind of hurt. Try my best to die here. But I think he should be pushed over. Yeah. So it actually has some pretty significant damage when some things like the Wave of Conviction, Flammability, those all pop, and if I have my pots up, I think I'm doing quite a bit of damage. Shaper at this point, I think they've updated him to have like 75 million damage, or 75 million HP, which is pretty chunky. So the funny thing is, before they tripled his HP or whatever they did to him in previous characters I've made, because of all the power creep that's come in, I previously have killed the boss slower before when he had a third of the HP, but they've added a whole lot of things into the game now that make getting higher damage numbers a lot easier, and on top of that I've got a decent amount better at making characters. But trying to think, this character probably for sure could hit higher damage with something like a Berserker. Yeah, you see there I was able to stun him out of his attack just because I'm hitting with such chunky hits, and I'm not expecting to stuns at all except for these gloves, which have reduced stun by 10%, but that's hardly anything. I have no flasks because I wasted them all, and I should have gotten more. Well, there goes half my diamond flask because I just used it because I thought he was going to go to beam phase. I also have a Valmolten shell. I pretty much pop that whenever I think I'm going to basically die, and it makes me mostly somewhat immortal. But so I just wasted it there just for the sake of popping it. Let me just place these in the worst places possible. But that's the gist of the character, what it feels like to play. Try not to judge it too harshly off of how bad I am at playing, but I went really heavy into damage by going with crit, going with Abyssus. You could easily probably do this build with Elemental Overload. You'd have to switch around the tree. You probably wouldn't be going over here. You wouldn't be grabbing all this crit here and here, and you'd go a lot more into damage nodes, and then you'd be able to get a decent amount of life on your helmet and amulet and stuff like that, and make it a pretty unkillable character at that point, but you'd probably sacrifice, I don't know, 30-50% of your damage, something like that. But that's the gist of my Facebreaker Chieftain. Moral of the story is I tried to pick up penetration from my cast and damage setup with flammability and wave of conviction. I have combustion on that too, so basically once those proc on a boss, that's a huge amount, pretty much doubling my damage almost, because it takes down the resistances by 60 or so when all things are done and considered. But before that I'm doing a couple million damage, I think, roughly. Use these rings plus shield like this to get a really high level Herald of Purity, and then you can really abuse how much physical damage you get flat wise for your Facebreakers. Now I'm using Consecrated Path. You probably can use this sort of setup for a lot of other physical skills that work with Facebreaker where they have flat added physical. Like if you really wanted to abuse this mechanic, say with a champion Impale, stuff like that, with doing Cyclone, you could abuse it. You'd probably hit a lot higher damage numbers, but maybe it wouldn't be as fun. So if you feel like trying out my build, or you have any questions about it, I'm going to try to keep streaming somewhat regularly, and you can come by, ask any questions you guys have. So have a good one.